started in just a bit. Let's see how this works. Hey folks, come on in. Make sure the cameras are set up. So welcome to another Wednesday workshop. I am your host, Dr. Webb. I am always pleased and delighted to talk with everyone from week to week. As you know, the topics are always related to colorism, but they vary. And so this week's topic is privilege in the context of colorism. So we talk a lot about white privilege. We don't really talk about privilege in terms of people of color and the various skin tones and ethnicities amongst people of color. So I kind of want to dive into that today. But before I jump into the heart of the talk, I want you to introduce yourselves. I want you all to say hello, especially if this is your first time watching. Tell me your name, where you're located, what you're snacking on, if anything. Wave at some of these folks on the gram fam, some of my favorite folks. And while you're introducing yourselves and saying hello, I'm going to jump into a few announcements, okay? So the Colorism Healing Writing Contest Anthology is up for sale on the website. So the books are ready to print and ship. And I'm still doing a sale through July 15th. If you use the coupon code LAUNCH2020, you get 20% off at colorismhealing.com/bookstore. And we did have the live book launch a couple of weeks ago, a little less than 2 weeks ago. So if you are interested in seeing some of the writers and authors read their work, if you're interested in hearing from the authors themselves talk about their experiences, you can catch the replay of that on the Colorism Healing YouTube channel. New Hampshire and first time. Hi Alicia, she, her pronouns. Welcome. Thank you for joining. I love first timers and my regulars who show up from week to week. Beauty Tam. My name is Tammy, located in Delaware. What's up, Delaware in the house? We have hello, Justine, watching from the UK, first time. Thank you, Justine, for watching all the way in the UK. It's pretty late over there, huh? Again, I am Dr. Webb. So thank you all for joining. Today's topic is privilege in the context of colorism. So I've done some previous workshops on intersectionality, and I did one last week on gender and colorism. So we were looking at dynamics of how gender can be a form of privilege and power. But besides the gender aspect of privilege in the context of colorism, we know that colorism is a system of privilege or a system of marginalization based on how light or dark someone's skin tone is. And then I'll get into how hair texture and eye color plays a factor in all that as well. I'm going to keep it much shorter than I did last week. We went almost an hour last week, so I prefer to keep them about 30 minutes, and I like to leave time for Q&A, to read your comments. So definitely pose your questions at any point. I can pause and respond to a question immediately, or towards the end, I'll make sure to check back for any questions I might have missed, okay? My name is Roxanne. I am from Haiti, living in the US. What's up, Roxanne? Hey, Armando. Hello. Okay, I said all those people. Walker Lids and Calm Eklo. All right, so privilege, a basic definition. So how I try to define it in the simplest terms possible is that it's an advantage or a benefit that you were born with or that you did not earn. You didn't do anything to earn this privilege. Things that you were born with could be, of course, your ethnicity, your race, your family's wealth or income status, right? You were born into these kinds of things. You didn't work to be able to have your parents afford to send you to private schools. You didn't work or study really hard to be male or white or cisgendered, right? So these are just things you're born with. And so that's why we call them privilege, because you have advantages and benefits in society because of those things. And if at any time something I say is confusing or you need more clarification, just feel free to pose a question or leave a question mark or give me a thumbs up if you are on board and understand everything. So when it comes to colorism, the features that we're born with are our complexion, but it can also be our hair texture, right? Our eye color, our facial features, right? The size and shapes of our noses, right? And so those things can contribute to the level of privilege that we have or do not have in the context of colorism. And this is also why people have such a hard time accepting and talking about privilege in cultures like the United States, right? So I can speak most directly to that culture. We have a myth of meritocracy. So people like to believe that everyone's a self-made man and that every single thing you get, it's because you earned it. It's because you were talented. It's because you worked hard. It's because you made wise choices and made good decisions, right? So we really adhere to this myth of meritocracy that people who succeed deserve to succeed because of their efforts, right? And so acknowledging privilege forces us to reveal or expose the myth of meritocracy, that in fact, many people who accomplish things or receive things did not do anything to earn them, right? And so that's why the discussion of privilege is hard for a lot of people to have. And then Josephine says it's the same in Germany, and I can definitely see that. I think a lot of westernized cultures think that, if you just work hard, you'll get to where you need to get. A second thing I want to talk about when it comes to privilege is that it's measured not just by what you get, but also by what you don't have to worry about, right? And so it's not just, oh, this privilege got me a job, but your privilege also allows you to not have to consider or think about or worry about certain things, right? So privilege is not just measured in how much you get or gain. It's also measured by how much you don't have to worry about in your day-to-day life, right? So one of the classic examples is makeup, right? So if you are fair-skinned, you don't have to worry about going into a store and finding a makeup brand that has something that will match your skin tone, right? That's a small, everyday inconvenience that you avoid, right? Whereas darker-skinned women for decades have had to put in more time. They've had to spend more money and spend more effort to possibly not even find a good match in terms of makeup, right? And so if you are fair-skinned, you have the advantage of being able to save time and in many cases save money because you can always find foundations and makeup brands that fit your skin tone, right? Another one, a good example that I heard at a conference is that when you go to conferences or you're staying in a hotel, if you have a certain hair texture, the shampoo and the conditioner provided by the hotel will work just fine for you, right? But for a lot of black women who have 4C or really, really curly hair, the standard shampoos and conditioners and blow dryers, right, that hotels provide don't work for you. And so you have to spend more money to pack your own hair accessories. You have to spend more time to bring them or go out and find them when you get to where you're going, right? And so it's a convenience that you benefit from, right? You get to save money and time, again, and energy and worry if you have, straight hair or, a certain hair texture that we associate with European ancestry. So those are just some examples. CJ Koa says, I believe it's the same for hair products. Only recently have they created selections in stores for natural hair. See, we're on the same wavelength. We're saying the same thing at the same time. So my example was the hair products in hotels, but as you're saying, CJ, is that even in the stores, right, there's a very limited selection of hair products. And what's considered normal or mainstream or the base product is usually for white people's kinds of hair, right? Very rarely do kinkier textures and coilier textures have the variety and the range of options, especially in a variety of price ranges at that. So again, the degree to which you don't have to consider these things or to the degree which you can be oblivious to these concerns is indicative of some level of privilege, okay? So this goes for not just white people, but there are people of color. There are black people, Hispanic people, Asian people who also have the privileges that I just mentioned, right? So they, because of their hair texture, even though they're black, right, or even though they're Latinx, they have the kind of hair texture that, you know, allows them to easily find hair products, that allows them to make use of whatever's offered in hotels, right? Or they have the skin tone of that a lot of makeup brands offer, right? So when we talk about these kinds of privileges, it's not just white people who benefit, but it's also people of color of various races who also have fairer skin tones and straighter hair textures. Beauty, Tammy says, if there are products in stores for our hair, it's sometimes locked up. Yes, I heard about that. They lock it up, right? So again, the microaggression, right? That, okay, so there's a stereotype about me as someone who buys these kind of products that the store chooses to lock it up, right? And so even that, knowing that you're given the benefit of the doubt if you have a certain kind of hair texture is in and of itself a privilege. Says, wow, thank you. At my work, we have a hygiene closet for our patients, and all the hair supplies are only for one type of hair. I can't believe I have thought about this, and we'll bring it up at work. Absolutely, Alicia. That's great. And so that's a tangible form of advocacy that we can take, right? So for those who are on Facebook, Alicia on Instagram is saying how at work they have a hygiene closet where people can use certain products, but all the hair products are only for a certain type of hair. And so diversifying that makes it a safer work environment for many people of color, right? It makes it a more inclusive work environment for coworkers and colleagues who have different hair textures. Roxanne says that even going out altogether these days can be draining for some of us, being that we are exposed to so much racism in day-to-day activities. Absolutely, Roxanne. So, you know, I had a few examples because I knew that the folks in the comments would come through with lots of other examples, right? And so y'all have already like contributed to this conversation with just the realness of the examples that you're putting out there. And so just walking out of my door, I'll give you a more specific example from my personal life, right? I just moved to a new neighborhood. I really like the neighborhood. I love the house and everything, but I love to run, right? And we know one of the famous cases of violent racism was Ahmaud Arbery being murdered while out running, right? And so I literally hesitated to go out running that first day. And I said, well, do I really want to do this? You know, like the town I live in, you know, is like sort of a red county and there are a lot of Trump signs. There are a few Black Lives Matter signs on my route, but there were definitely some Trump and Pence signs too. And so just the fear of being able to go out and run in my own neighborhood is something that either a white passing person of color or a non-black person or a white person would not have to even bother with, right? So thank you for saying that. Tammy said, this is a great conversation. Could you speak on the intersection of beauty, privilege, and colorism? My father is literally black, yet I think beauty privilege has worked in his favor without looking European at all. So this is Josephine. Josephine is talking about something called pretty privilege or beauty privilege. And so there are a lot of research studies that say if you control for all of the variables, people who are considered more beautiful are benefit, right? They are seen as more competent, right? They're seen as nicer and more moral, right? And one example of that is how in cartoons, the villain is always drawn or depicted as a quote unquote ugly person, right? Their features are somehow distorted or they're what mainstream society positions as unattractive, right? And the protagonist in a lot of movies and even, you know, live action films, the protagonist is always portrayed as being handsome or really beautiful and very attractive, right? So we definitely have a culture that associates the standard of beauty with also being morally superior, with being more professionally competent and just being good overall. And so In terms of colorism, right, that's when you get a lot of, especially for men, it's interesting that you're using the example of a man's perspective, is that a lot of really dark-skinned men are considered very attractive and very handsome in society. And we look to Hollywood and the US for that, right? We think about all of the, Idris Elbas, all of the Taye Diggs, the Omar Epps' and all the, black male actors who are known for being dark-skinned but are also seen as icons of handsomeness or male beauty. Since I realized with the conversation about fat phobia and treating women and femmes who do not fit into size norms with respect, that I benefit from what I think is called thin privilege. Yeah, I identify with that as well. I used an example on a prior live about an example of privilege is being able to go into just about any department store and not having anxiety about whether trying stuff on, not having anxiety about, is something going to fit me, are they going to have my size, or constantly being disappointed if I see something I like in the window and I go in and they don't have my size, right? So just like with the makeup example, the body, the size and shape of our bodies can be a form of privilege in terms of not having to think about the way our body is in space as much as people with different bodies, right? I see it at work, I see it on television, I see it at home, I see it in my relationships and in my friendships. It's just hard, absolutely. And I felt that way too, it's ubiquitous, right? And sometimes it's overwhelming because it's like I can't go anywhere to escape it. And that's when we have to really hang on and really use that inner strength and that, wherever we derive strength from, whether it's spiritual or, from our ancestors or whatever, because with things like colorism, with things like racism, and actually the thing with colorism is that it is even more unescapable a lot of times than racism because you can experience it when you're out with white people or people of other races, but you can also experience it at home, like you're saying. Zinc, I think is your name. You can experience that at home too, right? So it's overwhelming, and I think that's kind of why I'm here. That's kind of why I'm doing this work and why I've been doing it, is because it was hard for me and I didn't have places to go to talk about how hard it was. So thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I have about 8 more points about privilege. I'm gonna get to these because we're already at 4:18, but I'll go a little more quickly. The third thing is that you don't have to be aware of your privilege to benefit from it. So if you see the above examples, like someone mentioned, not realizing or recognizing that the hygiene closet at work only had hair products for one type of hair, right? So you don't have to be aware that you're receiving a benefit to receive the benefit of your privilege. And so that's something to keep in mind. A fourth thing is that we all have some form of privilege. And that's why I like some of the examples you've already stated, right? People talking about their body type, or even though they're dark skinned, they're also considered highly attractive, right? So they have a form of pretty privilege or handsome privilege or beauty privilege, right? And so we all have some form of privilege, right? Again, like I am a dark skinned and I'm woman, but I'm cisgendered and I'm a US citizen and living in the US, right? I'm thin and I've never really struggled with weight and things like that. So while I talk about colorism, I'm always willing to say, well, this is one area where I haven't felt that struggle, but I empathize with people who do. However, some people are definitely more privileged than others, right? And so we talk about intersectionality. We talk about how forms of oppression can compound or combine right on top of each other. A classic one is being black and being a woman, right? Or being black and a woman and queer and disabled, right? And all these various forms of identity that can compound. Well, privilege can compound too, right? So we can have more privilege than some people who are near us because we might have racial privilege as well as gender privilege, as well as religious privilege, as well as class privilege, right? And so just like our forms of oppression can layer on top of each other, our forms of privilege can also layer on top of each other. Okay, so let's keep going. Oh, and this is what I was getting into in terms of intersectionality, the point about how in the context of colorism, that's why experiences are so diverse, right? So you might have someone who's the same skin tone, but they have a different hair texture. And so they're going to say, well, I didn't really experience as much colorism, but it's because I have thinner features, or my eyes are slightly a lighter color, or my hair is longer and straighter, right? And so we can have to consider that too in terms of when we're talking to each other and realizing that it's not monolithic, that it's not, no pun intended, black or white, either or, right? So, and just like the example of the person who was saying their father was really dark skinned, but he's also like very attractive by other standards. And so even within colorism, these small feature differences, class differences in colorism can all impact, the degree to which we feel privileged or not. The seventh thing is that privilege can be contextual, and I think this is also an important one too. Josephine is saying agreed, intersectionality is relevant to privilege too. Jacqueline on Facebook says that's good. So, like intersectionality, privilege can be contextual. And what I mean by that is that if you walk into a room, you might very well be the lightest skinned person in that room. And so that will affect the power dynamics and the social dynamics in that room, right? But you can leave that room and go right next door to a different room and be the darkest skinned person in that room, right? And so again, your experience in either of those rooms is going to be drastically different because of the context, right? We can also think of it in terms of gender, right? So in a room filled with just women, right? We might see a power dynamic between cisgendered women and transgender women, or we might see a power dynamic between white women and Asian women versus black women, right? Or lighter skinned women versus darker skinned women. However, those women go into a group of men, right? And whereas they might have been a white cisgendered woman who had all the privilege in a room filled with women, in a room where they're the only female, they're not going to feel as much privilege, right? They're not going to be able to exercise as much power. And I hear a lot of people, especially people who have a more ambiguous racial look or are kind of brown skinned, right? And can't clearly fit into the boxes of, race that people have created. It can create sort of a whiplash, right? So I'm at home, I look like everyone else, and then I go to school and I'm the darkest one at school, but then I go and play sports and I'm the lightest one, right? So people experience a lot of whiplash, especially, if you are sort of in between, right? And then I think the eighth thing that I'm on 8. Okay, yeah, I think I'm on number 8. So good, we're almost to the end. Privilege does not mean perfection. I'm going to repeat that. Privilege does not mean perfection. So I'm going to finish this point and then we're going to go back to these comments because they look juicy. But I've had friends say, well, I don't like the term privilege because it suggests that people don't have any struggles. And I was like, no, that's not what the conversation of privilege means, right? Privilege does not mean that your life is perfect, that you will never lose, right? Or that you will always win. And I say privilege doesn't guarantee that you will always win, but it does increase your odds of winning. Okay, and so that's what we have to be real about when it comes to privilege. No one's saying that a straight, white, Christian, cisgendered male can never have problems, right? I see a lot of them who are homeless, a lot of them who are unemployed, a lot of them who have disabilities or mental illnesses, right? Who have gone to war and come back wounded. But they are still more likely to thrive in those situations than a man who was of color or a man who was queer or a man who was poor, etc., right? So even people who have privilege in some ways could still lose their jobs. They could still, get sick or still get sad or depressed. And so I think for us, we all need to consider that even though we're struggling or even though we might feel oppressed in many ways, it doesn't negate the privileges that we do have. Okay, so let's see what folks are saying. Walker Lived says, as someone who is half black, half Latinx, queer, and a fat person, but I'm also very light-skinned, undoing our privileges will make all of our lives better. Absolutely. And I'm actually going to get to that point too, right? So I want us to think about what it means to check your privilege. We have heard that term tossed around for a long time, like check your privilege, check your privilege. So I think one of the things you're bringing up, Walker Lived, is that it's not enough just to be aware of your privilege, but you also have to be actively involved in undoing the hierarchy. We have to be actively involved in dismantling these systems, right? And I think that's also what true allyship is. It's not just, I'm going to be nice to you, but I'm going to actively work to change the world and change the society or change the workplace or change the classroom environment so that you are safe and that you can show up in your full self. Roxanne says, the context you are talking about is so true. This is something I have struggled to explain to people that say that racism and colorism is not a thing in the Caribbean because the majority is black. Absolutely. So in a lot of countries, right, where everyone's considered to be the same race, they still make very real distinctions between how you look. So even though, in India, for example, they're all considered Indian, right? They have different castes and, different subgroups within that country, but they all still consider themselves to be the same nationality. And yet there are very distinct preferences and discriminations and marginalizations based on who's fairer skinned versus who's darker skinned, right? And so it's the same in many countries that are majority black, are majority indigenous, are majority Indian, right? Are majority Asian of some sort, right? Okay, so number 9, I think even though privilege is contextual and in some cases your privilege is less pronounced than in other situations, we always have to keep in mind that there is a system, a social-wide, a societal-wide system of hierarchy at play. And so I think this is when I hear white men talk about being bullied when they were kids, right? Well, the black kids beat me up when I was a kid, right? And so yes, in that situation, you did not have power in that group of 5 people, for example. You were overpowered or dominated by the black kids who beat you up. But privilege is related to the social system in which you are advantaged over those same group of kids, right? So yes, you might have been bullied, but if you go out into the world and stand side by side with the people who bullied you, are you going to be on the level playing field with them? Are you going to be elevated above them? And so that's a question we always have to ask ourselves, right? So again, even for me being thin, right? I might have been called lanky, or I might have been called, some people told me I need to eat more or whatever, or, like light teasing about, especially amongst African Americans, about not being curvy enough, right? Or not being thick enough, right? But despite like those jeers and those jokes, right? I don't ever consider that to be equal to what plus size women go through in society, right? So yes, even if people are calling me names, I can look at mainstream media, magazines and TV shows and get messages that affirm my body type, right? And so I think we all have to ask ourselves that, like, even if in like my home life, I was ostracized for being the lighter skinned child, what is my role in the larger society, right? So while I'm addressing my individual experience of being ostracized for being too light in my own family, I'm still going to address the social system that privileges lighter skinned people, right? And I think we are wise enough and smart enough to be able to juggle those two things. Says, right, it's all conditional. D1, real oppression means there's no higher authority to hold the perpetrator accountable. Yes. So in reference to the example of being bullied, or, you know, if a white guy says that being beat up by some black kids when he was in school is reverse racism, it's not reverse racism. Because like you're saying, D1, if those black kids beat you up when you were in middle school, I guarantee you they got expelled. I guarantee you they probably got arrested. I guarantee you they probably got beat up in kind, right? Or retaliated against in some way, right? Real oppression is what happens to black people all the time, where we are brutalized, murdered, raped, etc., assaulted in so many ways, and the perpetrators go unharmed, they go uncharged, and they're not held accountable, right? And so that is definitely the mark of privilege, is that all people are susceptible to something bad happening to us, but a mark of privilege is how likely it is that you will receive justice for the bad things that happen to you, right? The last thing I'll say about privilege, I think I'm done. I said that. I said privilege does not guarantee that you will win, but it increases your odds of winning. And it also gives you a safety net, right? So it decreases your chances of losing, and it gives you a safety net if you do lose, right? So again, I think about the light-skinned black people, the light-skinned people of color, or the white people, or the white women who say, well, you know, I didn't get that job, or I didn't, get chosen for the cheerleading team, or, you know, I didn't win the beauty pageant, or whatever, you know, the competition is. But someone with the same resume, or someone who put in the same amount of hours to practice for the drill team, right, who was darker skinned, wouldn't have made it either, you know? So I think that's an important thing. So the Q&A, again, I want to ask you what it means to you to check your privilege, right? So if we're telling each other, telling ourselves, telling other people to check their privilege, what exactly are we asking them to do? That's one thing I'd like us to gain clarity on, right? And something tangible that we can all do, what it means to check your privilege. What does that mean to you all? And I'm wrapping up now, because I did say I was going to stay on time this week, and I'm 2 minutes over. So while y'all are dropping in some comments about, for you, what it means to check your privilege, I'm going to give some what I call the Beatitudes, right? So y'all know they have the Beatitudes in the scriptures. So for checking your privilege, A, it means to be aware. So you can't check a privilege that you're not aware of. And so be reflective in moments, right? When you're out in this culture and you're at a restaurant and the waitress gives you the check, even though there are 5 other people at the table, right? What about me made her assume that I was going to pay for all these 5 people, right? So look for all these like instances that might be a sign for you to self-reflect and say, okay, at this literal table, I am the more privileged person, right? Because of how people are interacting with me and treating me. The second beatitude is to be considerate, right? So not just being aware of where you're privileged, but I think about it in terms of not doing unnecessary harm. So sometimes ignorance is just as harmful, like the result of ignorance can be just as harmful as outright malice or outright hatred, right? And so you need to ask yourself, like, am I taking up space that someone who's more marginalized than me really needs or deserves, right? And in terms of colorism, I see that a lot in terms of lighter skinned actresses, for example, or even biracial or mixed race women taking roles for characters that were originally designed to be darker skinned, right? In an industry where there's already an overrepresentation, right? So not only being aware, but being considerate and asking yourself, am I taking up space right now in a field or in an area where I'm already overrepresented, where I'm already overprotected, right? And then the last thing is to be the change, right? So don't just know your privilege and acknowledge it and say, yes, I'm privileged, but also actively try to advocate for and change the system, change the laws. And again, this is contextual. So if you are, again, in the film industry and you're making a movie, you can be the change by having an explicit conversation with your casting directors and saying, look, Hollywood has a pattern of colorism, and I'm going to be watching closely the choices that we make as a casting, crew. And I want to make sure that we have accurate representation or fair representation of the diversity of the people we're representing in this film. The same thing with any other profession or any other field of service or work that we're in. Jacqueline says, it means to recognize it in spaces when there are signs that I get a pass. Signs that I get a pass. And we know when someone is treating us a little better than our friend who came with us. We know when someone is, treating us worse than our friend who came with us. Jacqueline says, and somewhere someone else might not. Raylan Daniels on Facebook is saying, it means being self-accountable and asking yourself, why am I choosing this person? To make sure your intentions and actions match, that you are choosing the most qualified, choosing love, etc. Ooh, I like that. Yes. Choosing the most qualified. And being absolutely aware of the fact that our literal perceptions of who's most qualified are influenced by the cultural conditioning that we've been exposed to for decades, depending on how old we are. Most of us have been exposed to this conditioning all our lives. And so your literal perception is influenced by these cultural conditioning. And so even if you think you're choosing the best applicant, even if you think you're choosing the most talented person, even if you think you're choosing the one who's most professional, check yourself again. Cross-check with a coworker, cross-check with a colleague and say, am I actually perceiving this the way I think I am? Because we have all been conditioned, and that affects our biases. Last week, I told everyone to take the implicit bias test, right? So that means you cannot even be aware of your bias, and you really think, like, of course I'm choosing the most qualified people. They just all happen to be white. It's like, okay, not trying to throw any shade, but in places where I've worked, and it's like, if we're all just hiring the most qualified people, we just don't have enough black applicants. We just don't have enough minority applicants. That's why all the people we hire end up being white. It's like, I think we can do better than that. I think we can not make that excuse. Okay, let's see. Dewan says, Dr. Webb, we appreciate you so much. How can we support you in your work more? Alyssa Parsimple says, yes, understand our own implicit bias. Dewan, thank you for that question. You can support me in my work more by sharing it on social media and tagging me in it. I also have a new book, a new anthology that just came out from the writing contest, so you can definitely buy copies of the book, not only to support me, but to support the future of the contest, right? So cash prizes, book designs, copy editing, all that costs money. So when you're buying books, you're supporting the future contest, so that I continue to offer cash prizes to the writers and continue to be able to, pay artists for their great work and that sort of thing. And then I've also recently started offering one-on-one mentoring sessions. This is a pilot program of mine. I get a lot of personal questions and queries for advice about specific experiences. And so I want to offer advice and help and support one-on-one in a more structured way. So those are some ways that you can continue to support the work. Okay, homework for you all is to check your privilege, me included. I gotta do that too, I know. But don't just check your privilege, but leverage your privilege in support of other marginalized people. So don't leverage your privilege for selfish gain and say, well, I'm gonna leverage my privilege and beat out the competition. No, leverage your privilege to create space for people who are underrepresented. Leverage your privilege to change a policy in the boardroom. Leverage your privilege to change a policy on the police force and on the school board, right? So find ways to leverage your privilege over the next week. And your affirmation, I'm gonna leave y'all with this because it's 4:40. You are worthy, you are valuable, your value as a human is not dependent on your productivity. Your worth is intrinsic, not based on whether or not you quote unquote win or lose. or beat out the competition. Your humanity is recognized by a higher power, even if other people don't recognize it. And most importantly, I hope you recognize your humanity. All right, y'all. Thank y'all for hanging in there with me and tuning in for another week. I gotta go turn the AC on because I've been sweating for like the last 20 minutes. But I'll see y'all next week. I don't remember what the topic is for next week. I'll have to go back to my post and check. But these are going to be going on indefinitely. So if there's a question or a topic that you'd really like to see me discuss, just let me know. I'm happy to address questions more directly or specific themes and nuances. Even if you asked it, in a live, you can ask me to bring it up again so we can go more in depth into these topics and issues. Because I'm here for y'all. Anything y'all want to know or discuss or gain perspective on, that's why I do it. All right. Love y'all. Bye. Mwah. How do I? Okay.